All right, let's continue with the creation process of this character. This is basically where we left off in the previous lesson. I just went ahead and did basically the same thing that I did for the head, but for the body. And this is what we're going to focus on in this lesson. I'm going to show you how to do certain effects or certain things to add a little bit of depth and basically refine some of the details that you might already have in your character. I also went ahead and added a couple of colors here for the base. So I have a dark green and a light green, and the light green is using a custom mask, as you can see, to sort of like map this color in there. And that's pretty much it. So we're going to focus on a couple of things that are new, something different that, again, different tools that you can incorporate in your workflow. And if you look at the body, again, it looks a bit complex, similar to the head, but it's more of the same. It's just the same repetitive action. And if I, for example, look at something like this in the pants, let's go ahead and access that folder. This is a little bit messy. Don't worry, I'm going to cover this in a bit more depth in just a second. But if I open up the pants folder and I look at this sort of orange thing here, let's also turn off these outlines. So this orange color, the mask is super simple. And this mask is made out of the same technique that I showed you in the previous lesson. So all of these ones are ultimately different paths that I added. So let's go ahead and select the first one just to show you what it does. I'm going to select the path. So I have this path that goes all around, and I'm using symmetry as well, so I can just edit this as much as I want to. And the effect, or this sort of like triangular effect, that is done because of the alpha. So I have a simple triangle called the shape border triangle. You can find it in the resources that come with Substance 3D Painter. And I just added that and play with the spacing and the size to get this effect. Same thing with this other path. This is actually just one, right? And this other one's kind of like creating this sort of floral ornament effect is with a different layer. So let's go ahead and select that one. And you see it's very similar to what we did for something like the nose or the even the dividers of the teeth of the character. So it's the same thing, just a couple of points. You can edit this any way that you want to and, change the look and feel of it. Now, the other layers that kind of like give you the outline of these details, that's kind of like what I'm going to show you in this lesson. There's a really cool and simple way of doing that, and we're going to reuse or reiterate the use of the anchor points. So basically, if I take my original path here and move the orange bit, you'll see how the outline sort of follows it. So it's kind of like applying the outline to this pattern. So that is pretty fun and really easy to do. So as you can see, it is more of the same, exactly the same thing as I show you on the face, just repeating the same process and going through the motions of, adding the different paths and playing around with different alphas and the spacing and all of that. Now, the two main things that are different are things like the vest that you see here that also has a tiny bit of, a bit of depth, you can see, and that is done all with the anchor points as well, and using the displacement or the height technique, just like we did with the eyes. The other thing that is not visible here, let's go ahead and select the head, this one right here. So I'm going to show you how to create a simple pattern like this, or how to utilize a custom pattern that you can create somewhere else, something like Photoshop or Illustrator, and bring it into Painter. And that is the same thing that I use for the pattern here in the vest, right? So let's go ahead and start with that. One more thing is I want to show you how to create something like that, like the pupils. Again, it's something extra, like another technique, really fun, and you can use it for something else, not necessarily for the eyes, but I thought I would share it with you in case you want to use it. All right, so let's go ahead and start with the feet, for example. So let's go into the body. By the way, the shortcut to select the different pieces of the mesh is holding the Control, the Alt, and the right click. And that basically allows you to switch between the different meshes. So that's what I just did. I held Control, Alt, and the right click to access the body. And then if you want to go into a solo mode or just see this object, you can press the Alt and Q. And that way it isolates that specific mesh or that specific texture set that you have selected. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and hide the two elements that I'm going to replicate, which are the vest. Let's turn this off. And the same thing for the feet. Right? So this is the thing that I'm going to replicate just because it's slightly different than the other techniques. Everything else that you see in the body is literally the same thing. It's just more of the same. Just to reiterate, these ornaments here that look slightly different. You see, if I select this path, I can still edit it. So what I've done here to create this sort of like tapering effect is not necessarily different from what I showed you already. It's just that I went with selecting each one of these points and I play with the pressure. So I can still do that. So I can reduce this one, then select this one, maybe increase it a tiny bit. So that's basically what I've done to generate these sort of ornaments or these patterns, right? But like I said, the rest is the same. All right, so let's go ahead and concentrate on the feed first. So I'm gonna collapse this and I'm gonna create another folder and I'm gonna call it feed. And you can go ahead and do the same thing. Using folders really helps to organize, particular assets. So you can just work on maybe just the sleeves or just the jacket and have it all within one folder. I want to do the same thing for the vest. So let's create another folder, call it vest. And let's go ahead and start with the feed. I'm going to bring in a new fill layer. And this fill layer is going to be that sort of purple color. Again, it's not going to be exactly the same, but I'm just going to try to replicate what I had. And I'm going to only use the color. So Alt, click on color. And that way we only have the color and the rest of the information comes from the layers below. All right, let's bring in a black mask and let's add a paint. All right, so far, exactly the same thing that I've shown you before. I'm gonna use the polygon fill and I'm just gonna select the areas that I want to, create kind of like this boot for the fit. So something like that. Yeah, perfect. This is what I wanted. All right, so that is the first bit of the mask. If I access the mask, you see it's just this bit, but I want something else, that looks a bit more interesting. So I'm gonna bring in another layer, another paint layer, and I'm gonna use this path tool, and I'm gonna go ahead and click once in here, and I'm gonna use the size tool just to increase it, and then we can reposition that a little bit. Let's go ahead and do the same thing here for the inside. Oops, let's undo that. Make sure that you hit the Enter key so that we accept the first path, even though it is just a single point. And let's click once again here. And now we have the one in the inside. Let's reduce the size a tiny bit. All right, so that looks okay. Now I'm gonna show you something else that you can do with paths. Let's create a new paint layer, right? And what I wanna do is copy and paste different paths into the new layer. So let's call this one the base of the feed. The second one is going to be large rounded shapes. And this third one is going to be inner shapes. All right. So right now we don't have anything. So let's go to the large rounded shapes. These ones right here. Open up the path. And I want to select the first one. And this is the one that we have right here on the outside. I'm going to right click on it. And I'm going to click on copy path. Right. That way I can go to the inner shapes and open up the path. Right now I don't have anything, but I do have the path tool selected. So I'm gonna right click in it and click on paste path. So right now I have exactly the same path or the same position of this point that I have in this layer, but in the new layer. So right now I'm not doing anything different, but I can just go ahead and change this to a black color. And you see that kind of like inverts things again. And we can go ahead and play with the size. Let's go ahead and play with that. Maybe move it up a bit. All right, so that kind of like creates some kind of like handles for the boots that I thought, they were fun. So I'm just gonna do something like that. All right, so let's go ahead and repeat the process so that it's clear. Let's go back to the previous one. I wanna select the second path, right click, copy path. Let's go to the inner shapes, the new layer, right click into path and paste it. All right, so now it is in there. Let's go ahead and change the color to be black and let's change the size. So another really fun way of using this path that you can just simply copy and paste them and reuse them anywhere that you want. So basically, just with these three layers, we created a much more customized mask for the shoes, and this is all within this color. So we have this, purpley color for the boots. All right, so now let's go ahead and create something for the bottom piece of these shoes or these boots, and we can do that with a fill layer. Let's go ahead and click on fill layer, and let's do the same thing as always. So Alt, color, and select maybe a yellow tone, like so, and then bring in a black mask. All right, so let's go ahead and click on a new paint layer, and we can use the path tool to create a path along the bottom, or we can also use the polygon fill. So let's go ahead and select some of these polygons, make sure all around it's working fine. And we can also do the same thing for the inside. So maybe for this area, we can just duplicate this layer. So right click, and let's go ahead and duplicate it. And let's go ahead and put it at the bottom. And let's go ahead and remove this paint layer. And let's add a new one. And this time I'm just going to use the normal paintbrush. In fact, let's go ahead and click on this X just to remove this filtering. Go to the paint brushes. And let's select the basic hard. All right, so I'm just going to click once in here. And that's about it. Maybe here in the inside as well. And because this layer is below the purple one, this is what I just did. The purple one is kind of like overriding this area. And then we have the the sole basically of this of the shoes. All right, so that is very straightforward, nothing really complicated at this point. But now we can just go ahead and start playing around with anchor points again and create that nice outline like I have here around the orange color. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to click on the mask for the purple area. That's the one that I want to add the kind of like the outline. And I'm going to go ahead and click on add anchor point. So now anything that is below this anchor point in this layer is going to be anchored to anything else that we want to use in the layer stack. So let's go ahead and call this one boots. And let's create a couple of new layers. So I'm going to click on fill layer. And we can put this here at the top. It doesn't really matter. And I'm going to call this one drop shadow. And let's go ahead and do the same thing with another fill layer. And let's call this one outline. All right. And just like I did with the other ones, I'm going to hold the Alt key and click on color. And I'm going to select a black color. And from the drop shadow, I'm going to do the same thing. Alt, click on color channel just to isolate it. And then go to a black color. All right. Now let's start with the drop shadow first. And then we're going to come back to the outline. So we're going to bring in a new mask. Click on black mask. And let's add a fill layer. So let's go ahead and click on fill layer. And just like we did before with the anchor points, I want to reference these boots, right? I want to reference this specific mask, right? So what I'm going to do from the drop shadow, the fill, when I click on the grayscale, I'm going to go to anchor points and I'm going to find the one that I need. So boots. All right. So now we have exactly the same mask in here, the one that we created with all of these shapes and paths and all of that. We have it in here in a single fill layer, right? So what we can do is utilize this to fine tune and refine this mask to add it on top. So let's go ahead and get into the mask so that we can see clearly what we're going to be doing. And let's go ahead and add the filter, and we're going to choose the mask outline that we've used before. So this one is really cool because it allows you to create this nice gradient, but I want to change a couple of things. So you see this edge right here, the inner edge is basically where the outline of the previous mask ends. So this is the original mask, right? And now the mask outline is starting from this edge outwards, right? So this is one of the things that I want to change. And that can be changed easily by clicking on this start from black to make it false. So I want to click on that. And now you see that it's not starting from the black color. It's starting from the white color going into black. So if you leave this as true, this effect or this outline is going to look at the outline of the mask and it's going to start from black going into white and then into black again. So if I make it into false, it's going to start from the outline. Let me just turn this off. You see the outline is there. So it's starting from the outline and it's going to fade into black. That's the easiest thing that you can change just to make it happen. So basically what we now have is a very simple mask that is fading from the borders or the edges of our boot into the other areas. And we can go ahead and play with the threshold, right? We can play with all of that. I think I'm going to leave it as it is. We can play with the width. We can play with the blur a little bit. We can play with the curvature shape. So all of this is really useful. So what I want to do is click on the actual layer, the drop shadow, and you see the effect that this layer is having on the boot, right? I can just go ahead and select that boot the mask of the boot, go to the mask outline, and I can play with the curve shape. As you see here, we can change the width a little bit so that it spreads. But as you can see, it's not affecting the purple color. It's just affecting everything else, right? And that is the idea. That's what's generating that nice sort of drop shadow. So I think I'm happy with this. Maybe change the curvature shape a tiny bit more just to sharpen and making things a bit darker around here. And even though it is a very subtle thing, if I turn this on and off, you see that it does a lot, right? It just helps to differentiate this and creates this sort of visual cue that there's some kind of depth in here, or there's a bit of a difference in terms of the height, even though it's not. It's just a color effect, right? But it helps to integrate things a little bit. So this is a really cool technique that I like to use for this more graphic texturing. So let's go ahead and continue with the outline, and we're going to replicate the same process so that it just makes it a little bit easier to understand. We're going to use very similar techniques. So let's click on the outline. And let's click on black mask to create a new black mask. Let's create a new fill layer and let's just reference exactly the same anchor point. So I'm going to click on boots. And this is another really cool thing about anchor points. You can just create one single mask that it is your anchor point. That's what we have here. And then you can use any number of layers that you want to reference that mask and adjust this specific mask. So let's go ahead and replicate exactly the same thing that we had in the previous one. I'm going to bring in the filters. Let's click on filter and let's go ahead and click on mask outline. And there we go. And I'm also going to go into the mask so that you can see what we're doing. Exactly the same thing as we had before. Now, this time, I don't want to have the mask position in the outside. I'm going to have it in the inside and the outside so that we can create a nice outline going across the, the edge of the original mask, right? So I'm going to switch from outside to both. And I'm going to change this to be false. There we go. So it's not starting from black. And now we can go ahead and play with the width a little bit. Maybe reduce it slightly. Something like that. I don't want to make it too narrow. Maybe a bit more than that. Let's just set it to 0.02. Yeah, this should be okay. All right. The curve shape and the blur, I'm just going to leave it as it is. So you see we have a nice outline. Let's go ahead and check that out. So that is working nicely. However, it is not as sharp as the other ones, right? So again, we can go ahead and add more filters, more of the things that I've shown you in previous lessons so that we can refine the look of this specific mask. So let's go back into the mask. Let's have a look at the mask as well. And I'm going to bring in the levels. And once again, I'm going to use the levels to kind of like crunch these values. So I'm going to push the white highlights towards the back and the black tones towards the center. So basically removing any mid grays really like that. All right, so that is going to really sharpen up this line. And what we can do actually is, you see it is a bit jagged here. We could turn this off first and then use this mask outline to add a little bit of blur maybe. So you see it's not as jagged. So just adding a bit of blur before you apply the levels actually helps. And there we go. So we have something a lot cleaner. And just because of the way that this mask outline works, it actually looks at the UVs as well. So if I rotate around, you see I have this extra line happening, which might be not ideal for what you want. So what we can do is just refine this manually. So I'm going to add a new paint layer just here. And I'm going to use the path so that we can edit this if we need to. And I'm going to click, let's go ahead and change this to a black color. And let's go ahead and click here, and then let's click here as well. So it's just a little path covering this area. And because it is a path, we can just change the size. And we can also change the placement as well. Maybe increase the size a tiny bit and then just reduce or push the placement a bit down like so. All right. So that's not too bad. But it's just like a tiny little refinement that happens because of the way that we tweak this mask outline. All right, so if we go back out into the color, you'll see that we have a very nice edge, right? Or a very nice outline. And it is also using the shadow. The reason I do it this way and the reason I like to do it with anchor points is because then I can go ahead and change anything that I want in this boot or the original mask, and everything else is going to go with it. So just to give you an example, if I create a new paint layer, right below, let's go ahead and call this one test, and it's right below the anchor point, so it is included into whatever I do here, right? I'm going to go ahead and paint. Let's reduce the brush size. And I'm just going to paint like that, right? So I'm just painting with the purple color, but at the same time, these masks that are referencing the boots mask, it is actually updated in real time, and then you get the drop shadow and you get the outline, right? So it's a really, really powerful workflow, and I use it all the time. So let's go ahead and undo that now. Of course, we don't want to have that squiggly line in there, but this is basically how I created those outlines. And I applied the same technique to create the outlines for these triangular shapes, for these sort of more floral ornaments and that sort of thing. All right, so the next thing in the list would be to import custom resources, and that's what I did for the vest. So first of all, let's go ahead and define where the vest should be, or the outline of the vest. So let's go ahead and collapse the fit here. And in the vest, right now, I don't have anything. So what I want to do is create a new paint layer. It could be anything, and this could be just a simple reference color that we're not going to use, but it is a reference color. And instead of creating a mask for this particular layer, what I want to do is create a mask for the entire folder. And what this will allow me to do is to put anything that I want inside this folder and be constrained by a specific mask, or like the same mask. So let's click on Add Black Mask to the folder, and let's go ahead and click on a paint layer like so. And I'm going to use this path tool to define the path of this vest. So I'm going to start here from the top. Let's go ahead and click on this one here. Then I'm going to make it kind of like similar to what I had before. And let's go around so, and then let's continue. And let's go ahead and change the color, because otherwise it's not hiding anything. So let's hide that color. And also, I'm going to go ahead and select this point right here. I'm going to make it a corner point. This one as well, corner point. So it just sort of creates a more interesting shape. You can totally go for something different, but it's just more about the workflow. All right, so this allows me to have a very refined, very nice sort of like outline for this specific, garment or the vest. And then I'm going to create another layer just to fill things in, and I can put that on top or below. So let's go ahead and click on a new paint layer, and let's call this one fill vest, and we can also call this one outline vest, so that we know what we're doing. So for the fill vest, instead of using a path, I'm just going to use the normal painting brush, and I'm just going to use this just to paint around here. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to show you this particular workflow is because of the arms are kind of like in the middle, or like are on the way, so that you cannot paint this area. So if I just go ahead and start painting this, I'm going to also accidentally paint the arms. So one of the simplest things that you can do is switch to the 2D view. So let's go ahead and press the Tab key on your keyboard, and let's also switch to the 3D and 2D view. And that way you can see what you're doing. And this is a lot easier so that you don't have interference with the arms. So now just gonna paint all of this. All right, and this is gonna be the vest. And you see there's still a little bit of paint spilling here, but I'll fix that in just a second. Just a faster way of doing it. So that's kind of like the fill. You see everywhere in the vest is now blue. And the way that you can fix this sort of like spillage, let's go ahead and get back to the 3D view. Let's press the tab bar, and I'm going to use this polygon fill, and I'm going to make sure I have the UV selected. I'm going to click on the arm, and that selects the entire UV island that makes up the arm. So that's just a very quick way of going around this issue that, if you're painting a mesh that is very close to another, you have this sort of like spillage of paint. So let's go back in here. So now we have defined the vest. Obviously, this color is not the one that I'm going to use. I can change it for something else. It doesn't really matter. Actually, I'm just going to toggle everything off and just leave color and just give it a gray tone. That's it. Now, one thing that you notice is that these sort of like strokes that I have here for the equivalent to the ribs of the character are also coming through the vest. That is because this folder and this layer have no information on the hide channel. So it is using this hide that I have for this specific layer. So what I can do is create a new layer and control the hide of the entire vest separately, and that can be done with anchor points. So let's go ahead and do that straight away. I'm going to create a new layer outside of the vest. Right? And I'm going to call this one hide CTRL. So hide control or vest hide control. Right? And that means that I'm going to use this layer to control the hide of the vest. So I'm going to turn everything except the hide, because that's the only channel that I want to affect. And of course, I can just go ahead and do all of this. You see, it's just changing the hide for everything, but that's not what I want. And you're probably already thinking about it, and the answer is yes. I'm just going to go ahead and use an anchor point. So let's select the mask that we created for the vest. Let's create an anchor point here. Let's click on the vest hide control, create a new mask, and let's go ahead and select a fill and select the anchor point called vest mask. All right. So now if I select my mask with the hide, I can just affect only the hide of this vest. So that's exactly what I want. I just want to add a tiny bit of not too much, just a tiny bit of extra hide for the vest. There we go. And if things are looking a little bit too triangulated, again, you can increase from the shader or from the displacement, you can increase the division count. So I'm going to go for 20, which is a bit high. Maybe it is too high, but yeah, it should be okay. And the other thing that you can do is blur that line of the mask, right? So if I select the mask, or from the anchor point, actually, I just realized that there's a gap in here. So I'm going to go back to the fill of the vest, and I'm going to go back to the 2D view really quickly, or 3D and 2D view, and I'm just going to fill this in. All right. And just like I did before, let's invert that and hide that. All right. So just a tiny tweak that I didn't realize it was there. But like I was saying, we can go ahead and blur these from the control. So we can also bring in some filter, click on blur, and let's have a look and see if that makes a difference. There we go. So we can control this blur effect just a tiny bit. You see, it just changes things. But that's exactly what I want. I just want to create a bit more of a hide in there. Let's select the layer again, and we can just tweak this even more if we need to. All right, so this is all great, but you can see that the ribs are still coming through, and I don't want that. I want to override this. So that happens because if I go to the hide channel here on the drop down, and this is just to select the specific channel, you see that by default, any layer that you create with hide information is going to be set to linear dodge. So what I need to do is click on normal, or to replace any of the hide information that is below this layer. Of course, if I put this layer below the ribs or anything like that, it's not going to work. But this layer is replacing anything that is below in terms of the hide. So that's why I call it the hide control. Let's go back to base color. And now we can just work with pure hide. And it's just replacing everything. Perfect. So now what we can do is create some nice patterns from this vest. So this is what I wanted to show you in terms of adding or importing resources that you might have done in another software or another application that you're familiar with. Let's say Illustrator or Photoshop. So if I go to my Photoshop files, I made this very simple pattern, and this is a tileable pattern as well, and also this one. So I have a couple of textures, and I'm going to go ahead and import them into Painter. So you can do this as a PNG. You can also export vectors, anything that you want. So these are a couple of PNGs that have repetitive patterns. That's it. All right. So I'm going to go to my files, and I'm going to import them. And the way that you import textures into Painter is really easy. I'm just going to go ahead and drag and drop them into the library, not the viewport, but the library itself. So I'm going to drag them in here, let go, and I'm going to get this import resource window. So all I have to do is define what these files are, right? So right now they're undefined. I'm going to select them both by clicking and dragging, and I'm going to click on this button right here and say, these are actually textures. And as you can see, you can import a bunch of different things, including alphas, color lookup tables, environments, but this is a texture. And now we can define where this texture is going to live. So if I click on this drop down here, you can set it for the current session that is going to be only available to you in this specific session of Substance 3D Painter. You can also set it to project, and that way it's going to be saved with this project. And you can also save it to your library. And that means that every time that you open 3D Painter, regardless of the project that you use, you will have that in there as your resource. So in my case, I'm just going to set it to current session. It's totally fine. I'm going to click on import. And there we go. We now have them in here. And because we define them as textures, you will find them in this texture icon. So what I want to do is apply this texture to the vest. So I can click and drag. And as soon as I do that, there's this sort of like square that it is projecting that texture. So I want to drop it in there. And as soon as I do that, I get this pop-up, and we can choose what this texture is actually for. So it is a base color. So I'm going to click on base color. And you see, we now have this texture in here. And similar where we've done before with the triplanar, we can just go ahead and click on these icons here at the top and just change the way that this is placed. So I can just scale this up. We can, rotate it around. We can reposition it. So this is a really nice and cool way of doing it, especially if you have kind of like a flatter surface or something that you don't want to wrap around. So in this case, it's okay, but it's not the best way of doing it, and it's not as non-destructive as the other workflows that I've been showing you. So you see, it just creates a new layer. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And instead, we're going to take this layer, the one that has just color, and we're going to create a new fill layer here. So you can create fill layers for mask, but you can also create fill layers for the, for the fill layers. So I want to click on this fill layer, and I'm going to also set it to color. So Alt and click on color so that this fill layer only contributes with the color. And I'm going to drop the color in here. All right. So as you can see, it just gets applied everywhere. Obviously, it is restricted by this mask as well, but it is applied everywhere. And in order to fix this sort of like weird shape, what we can do is change the projection of this texture. So let's go ahead and click on the fill layer again, the one that has the actual texture. And let's change the projection from UV projection to something like, let's try out spherical. Maybe not that one. Let's go ahead and try cylindrical, because the shape of the body is quite cylindrical, and I think that works fine. So you see, it is trying to wrap that texture around a cylinder, and that makes a lot of sense. Now it is a little bit too big, so we could go ahead and use this tool to scale everything down a bit, or we can actually use the tiling, and let's tile it by 6 times. I think 6 times is fine. Yeah, perfect. All right, I'm going to use the move tool to move it around. I'm going to find a nice pattern, and we can also rotate things around. So I'm going to rotate in this sort of x-axis a tiny bit. I think that makes a lot of sense. All right, so that's it. As you can see, you can create really complex stuff. And if you're familiar with other applications like Photoshop or Illustrator, for example, you can create a really cool set of patterns in here and then just bring it into Painter and it looks just fine. Now, another thing that we can do is refine sort of the outline of this vest. And we can do this with anchor points as well. So I'm going to click on a new layer, and this layer is going to be just color. And I'm going to use this drop down, and I can actually choose from these colors right here. So I'm going to use a green color like so, and I'm going to create a black mask. And let's go ahead and create a new anchor point. So in the vest folder, in fact, let's go ahead and right click and give this a different color so that you can see what I'm talking about. So in the vest folder, we have two fill layers. So the first one, if I go into the mask, if I turn off the fill vest, we already have this nice pattern. Right? We can go ahead and duplicate it like we've done before. So copy and pasting the path and just put it in here. Or we can use a different anchor point that only reads this specific layer. That's why I separate the outline from the fill. Because if I go ahead and create a new anchor point, let's go ahead and call this one vest outline. I can take this anchor point and put it just on top of the outline, right? So that means that it's not going to read anything that is on top. In other words, none of this is going to be read by this vest outline, and is going to anchor just the outline of the vest, right? So that means I can go into this one. I can click on Add Fill. I'm going to set the anchor point, and I'm going to find the vest outline. And just like that, I replicated what I had here, this outline vest, into this color. And that's it. And now I can do the same thing just for fun. Let's go ahead and duplicate this entirely. And let's select a different color. Let's go for a purple one, right? And I'm going to select this fill layer. And I can just go ahead and use something that we've used before, like the mask outline. You see, it's just giving me this effect. Let's go ahead and change this to be inside. And let's change this from black to false. And we can just go ahead and play with the shape a little bit and bring in the levels. So I'm just repeating some of the things that I've already shown you just to crunch these values. So ultimately, what we have here is just a very easy way to outline this with a different color. It doesn't have to be a black, right? So I just wanted to give you this extra technique because you can generate a very interesting set of patterns outside of 3D Painter, bring it in, and then continue the refinement process. So you see, very, very simple stuff. It looks really complex when you look at it as a whole, but individually, they're really simple techniques that are really practical and really fun as well. So just to wrap up this video, I'm going to show you how I replicated the same idea here for the back of the character. And that's basically what this other pattern is for. So let's go ahead and select the head of the character. And I already have it in here, as you can see, this one right here. So what I'm going to do is just recreate it again. Let's actually turn it off. And let's recreate it here. So a new fill layer. And you can add a new fill layer to this one, or you can just add this pattern straight in here. So Alt, click on color so that it only uses the color, drag and drop this into the base color, and that's it. So this is being dragged on top of everything, but we want to change the projection. So let's change this projection to spherical. So this time, the head is more of a sphere. So we can just go ahead and place this like so, and we can actually tile it first. So let's go for 12, maybe 10, right? So it is tiling that specific pattern, and I'm going to rotate it around. So I'm going to rotate it maybe 90 degrees. If I hold the shift key, by the way, it sort of like snaps to integer numbers. And then let's go ahead and reposition this a bit more, right? So just like that, we can go ahead and play with these patterns. And of course, you can scale it non-proportionally. So from this angle, you can scale the pattern like so, or add, more or less. So it is a really fun way of working. So after I've done this, after I place this pattern, I just went through the process of masking it or using anchor points to essentially generate this mask, right? So I'm going to show you the mask of this one. Is really simple. It's just a mask to create kind of like a beanie or something that has that pattern, right? The only different thing that I have here is this HSL Perceptive, which is just another filter that allows you to play around with the colors. So you can just add that from the filters, and it basically allows you to change the hue and the saturation a lot easier. So just an extra thing. And I did mention that I was going to show you how to create something like the eyes. So just the last thing that I want to show you in this video is how to create that. So let's go ahead and turn this off, and let's create the pupils here on top. So I want to repeat this. Again, it's more of the same. So just the fill layer, I'm going to use a yellow color and I'm going to hold the Alt key so that it is just the color that I want. Let's go ahead and create a mask, a black mask, and then bring in a paint. And I'm going to use this path, and I'm going to click around here just to create that dot in there. Perfect. And of course, we can just go ahead and play with the size. We'll do that in just a second. And let's go ahead and continue working with the mask, right? So I'm going to take this layer, and I'm actually going to add height so that I can just sort of like push it forward. So let's click on height, and I'm going to push it forward like so. And in the mask itself, we can now blur it. So we can just remove that sort of like sharp look, right? So let's go ahead and click on add filter. And this time I'm going to go for bevel instead of blur. So let's go for bevel. And you see it sort of like bevels things nicely. Gives this very sort of like bunch of artifacts around, but you can just go ahead and smooth that a little bit. And just like that, you get something that looks similar to what I had. The other thing that you can do is add a bit of blur. So let's go for blur. And you see that I use blur a lot. I'm going to go for a bit of that. And, you know, this bevel is a bit too intense. So I'm going to reduce the smoothing like so. And I'm going to go for, on top of that, I'm going to go for a levels. So let's bring in some levels. And again, just crunch those values so that it removes all of that noise that it had before. And just like that, we have something that looks similar to what I had. Again, very similar, very much the same thing that I showed you before. You can go ahead and go back to the bevel and just play around with that. So you can just change with the distance, right? So it is very dynamic in that sense. I'm going to reduce it so it's more rounded, right? And then obviously I can take the paint layer and the path. Let's go ahead and select that. And I can just place this somewhere else. Right? So that's what I like about this workflow, that once you set it up, it is very non-destructive and you can just go back and adjust anything that you want. All right, so that's it for the lesson. So hopefully you can see that every technique or every step that I gave you can be compounded together to create something really, really complex. But ultimately, the process itself is very, very simple and, you know, almost intuitive and really fun to do. All right, so I'm going to wrap it here and I'll see you in the final lesson.